Phase 1 movies in the MCU were a much simpler time, up until the alien invasion, that is. But even with things being easier for the characters when they were first introduced, a lot of important events and elements were laid out. If even one of these moments hadn't happened or unfolded differently, the entire MCU as we know it would be completely different, for better and for worse. It's weird as it is to think, the first ever threat in a Marvel movie boiled down to a really extreme attempt at a corporate takeover. Obadiah Stane had been a good family friend to the Starks, even becoming a temporary CEO when Howard Stark died. But that taste of power drove Stane to jealousy when Tony took his place. Obviously, the whole assassination attempt on Tony's life set him on the path to become Iron Man. But Pepper's ability to handle Stane coming into the office when she was downloading his files was one of the most important moments from Iron Man. If Pepper hadn't managed to hide the screen or failed to sneak the USB drive out of the office, Tony may not have survived. S.H.I.E.L.D. certainly wouldn't have had the authority to try and arrest Stane. If Pepper wasn't so amazing, Stane may never have been taken down.
What's your name, lady?
Rushman, Natalie Rushman.
There were a lot of agents that S.H.I.E.L.D. could have had shadow Tony Stark, but Natasha Romanoff, or Black Widow, was the one chosen. And it's a good thing that she was. Not only did this set her up to become one of the founding members of the Avengers, but she played a key part in the events of Iron Man 2. It's thanks to Natasha's skills that they were able to infiltrate Justin Hammer's HQ and give Rhodey control of the suit. If she hadn't been able to help everyone from Stark Industries, who knows how the events with Ivan Vanko would have played out. Plus, if Natasha hadn't been chosen, then someone else would have. And can you imagine if that had ended up being someone like, I don't know, say Grant Ward from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? That would have had the Avengers dealing with an undercover Hydra agent, and who knows how much trouble that could have led to. But Natasha wasn't the only important member of the Avengers that almost didn't make it into the team. When Bucky joined Steve on his mission back in 1943 to capture Zola, he ended up falling off the train to his death, with heavy quotation marks. While it was later revealed that he had survived thanks to the super soldier serum, if Bucky hadn't fallen off the train, things would have gone a lot differently. If he hadn't been lost, then the Winter Soldier would have never existed, and Howard and Maria Stark wouldn't have been killed by him. That would also change the way that Civil War played out. The split between the teams and the fight at the airport would have been completely different, or non-existent. But Bucky wasn't the only one from 1943. Captain America himself needed to jump more than 50 years into the future to join the Avengers.
Must be strange for you, all of this.
Well, this is actually kind of familiar.
If Steve didn't have to crash the plane at the end of his mission, or hadn't been frozen, things would have been very different. The symbol of freedom who became one of the leaders of the Avengers wouldn't have been able to join the group. Without Captain America, the whole MCU would have been different. The events of Civil War would have been completely different. After all, without Steve's voice, the other Avengers probably would have signed the Sokovia Accord. And that's if they even got to that point after all. Loki may have even managed to take over the world during the first Avengers movie. Rhodey had been a loyal friend to Tony from the very beginning, but on his final birthday, when Tony went a little overboard, Rhodey stepped in. For the first time ever, Rhodes put on one of the suits. Even though he's very shaky in the suit, he's able to take on Tony. After the fight, Rhodey hands over the Mark II to the military, and the events from Iron Man 2 really starts to unfold. This moment is what led to him finally becoming War Machine. It took a lot of bravery for Rhodes to stand up to Tony and do what he thinks is right, and it was a choice that led him down the path to becoming a part of the Avengers. One of the most important decisions that Tony Stark ever made was during the press conference where he announced to the world that he was Iron Man.
I am Iron Man.
By going against S.H.I.E.L.D.'s decision to hide his identity, he chose to set himself onto his own path. It also marks the idea of real superheroes being introduced to the general public. Not to mention, it was an incredibly iconic moment. Within a month of the movie's initial release, everybody knew and was talking about that final moment.
I now take from you your power.
Now, it was very important that Thor got exiled. The god of thunder learned a lot during his time on Earth, like sacrifice and love. And with these new lessons, Thor was able to prove himself to Odin and regain his mantle of heir to the throne of Asgard, a title that he would later give away. The experience is also how Thor gained a love for Earth, a love that was needed for him to join the Avengers. It set him and the rest of the team up to take on Thanos in Infinity War and Endgame.
Bring me Thanos!
Another world-shaking moment was when Loki made a deal with the other so that he could get an army. Now this marked Thanos' first step towards the snap, but if Loki hadn't agreed to team up with the other or hadn't lost, Thanos wouldn't have gone for such an aggressive approach to take down humanity. On the other hand, the deal caused the Avengers to assemble for the first time. The team that would become Earth's defenders wouldn't have existed if Loki hadn't tried to take over. In a way, Loki's deal set up both sides of the war. But Loki's plan wouldn't have been possible if he hadn't gotten control over Dr. Eric Selvig. At the end of Thor, when Nick Fury is asking Dr. Selvig to research the Tesseract, Loki is right behind him, whispering in his ear. If Loki hadn't been there to push Eric to accept Nick Fury's offer, or if he hadn't gained control of the scientist, none of the trickster god's plans would have been able to work. Loki would have had to find some other way of getting the Tesseract for his deal with the other. And while there's no doubt that he would have been able to find a way to get to the Tesseract, things would have likely gone very differently if he didn't use Selvig to do it. At the end of The Incredible Hulk, Bruce and the big guy were still at odds, but he was starting to gain control. Hidden away from civilization, Banner decided to tend to the sick and poor. During that time, Bruce seemed to have taken up meditation to calm himself and gain control over his transformations, a control that he shows off during Avengers. If he hadn't gotten control over himself, then there's no way that the Hulk would have been able to join the Avengers in the fight against the alien invasion.
I am a god, you dull creature.
And without the Hulk, who knows what Tony would have said to Loki announcing that he had an army? Of course, the battle to protect Earth never would have happened if the Avengers hadn't stood up to Loki in the first place. While the team had assembled, they only started to work as a team at that moment. It was also the start of Loki's defeat. If the Avengers hadn't come together, Loki would have gained control over the world. And then who knows how things with Thanos would have gone. Now this moment is also what led to the first spark of unity that the team needed to fight Ultron and Thanos. But one of the most important moments in the series is when Tony Stark and Ho Yinsen worked together to build the Iron Man Mark I suit. The suit not only allowed Stark to survive, but sent him down the path to the Battle of Earth. If Iron Man hadn't survived, Peter Parker would have never joined the Avengers, Ultron would not have been created, and even the battle against the Chitauri would have been different. Not to mention, Stark Industries would have kept producing weapons, and who knows what that would affect. Just like Tony needed the Mark I to become Iron Man, Steve Rogers had to jump on top of the grenade to prove his bravery. Since he was skinny as a twig before getting the super soldier serum, Steve wasn't the first choice to become Captain America. Colonel Chester Phillips had wanted Gilmore Hodge to be the soldier selected for the experiment, but then he threw the grenade. Steve could have chosen to jump out of the way like every other cadet, but instead he tried to protect everyone else. The act of bravery was enough to have Steve selected as Captain America. If he hadn't jumped on the grenade, we wouldn't have had the Captain America that we know and love. And who knows how the other members of the Avengers would react to this different Captain America. Maybe they'd love him and work together, but maybe it'd be impossible for them to get along. Either way, nothing in the MCU would be the same. Another key moment that happened during the experiment came at the very end. With Steve transformed and the experiment a proven success, Heinz Kruger, an agent of Hydra, detonated a bomb in the viewing area. Not only did Kruger manage to steal the formula, but he also killed Erskine so no other formula could be created. With the formula gone, countless attempts were made to replicate it. One project was led by Howard Stark, and another project led to the creation of the Hulk. If Erskine hadn't been killed and could still produce the serum, who knows the trouble that could be walking the alleys of New York. But out of all the moments that shaped the MCU from the Phase 1 movies, the most important moment was Odin's bad parenting. It was clear that Loki felt like Odin didn't care about him. When he learned that he was actually adopted, Loki had a small breakdown, yelling at his father for not telling him the truth and for seeing him as second to Thor. That anger at being second is what led Loki to do everything he can to prove himself. Everything in Thor was because Loki was determined to prove himself. But it was the moment that Odin rejected Loki at the end of Thor that led to the events in Avengers. If Odin had just been a good Allfather, showing love to both of his sons, who knows how things would have gone in the MCU. Phase 1 of the MCU was a different time, but it set up a lot of the events for Endgame. If even one of these moments hadn't happened, the series would be completely different. Thanos could have won, or the snap may have never happened. It just goes to show how important even the smallest of details are.